right, welcome to the webinar today. I'm your host, Dan Handford. I'm actually one of the managing partners of a group called PassiveInvesting.com. If you want to find out more information about me, you can certainly go to our website, PassiveInvesting.com. I'll show you here. This is our website right now. These actual numbers are not quite updated yet, so let me go ahead and click on that button. Those numbers can start to go up there as we're talking here. But you can go to our website, PassiveInvesting.com, and find out more information about our group. You can click on this button here called Meet the Team, and when you do that, you'll be able to see our team that's listed out here. So at the top here is our three managing partners of the group. Of course, I'm right here, Dan Handford, and then you can also connect with each one of us here on LinkedIn. So if you want to connect with us, you can certainly do that. We'll also have the rest of our team that is listed out here, so you can certainly see that. There's our marketing and investor relations team, our multifamily acquisitions and asset management team, and of course our self-storage acquisitions team, and then our debt fund team down here at the bottom. And if you're interested in joining us, we have some current opportunities for you to join us on our team. So you can click on that button there and see some of the different positions that we are hiring for. And then of course, if you're an investor and you want to join us, you can click on this blue button up here called Join the Passive Investor Club. It'll bring you to a simple form that you can fill out, and one of our investor relations team members will reach out to you, discuss your investment goals, and see if our group is a right fit for you. And of course, you can click on this button here and see our current offerings. So Ascendant Tamaron is a Class A asset out of Houston, Texas. You can take a look at. We also have our self-storage fund, which we have 2 assets already closed in that fund. We have 4 assets, 3 of which will be 4 assets under contract right now, 3 of which will close by the end of the year. So some tax advantages there for those of you who want to get into a deal between now and the end of the year. And of course, we also have our real estate debt fund that you can take a look at as well. And then finally, I want to mention our MFIN Summit. You can go to MFIN Summit. It's the Multifamily Investor Nation Summit. It's a live online 3-day event, all for multifamily investors. You can go there and check it out. It's going to be January 20th, 21st, and 22nd. So I won't go into too much detail there because you can certainly do that. We usually have over 900 attendees at that event and have 50 speakers. So if you want to learn more about multifamily, that is definitely the place to be when it comes to multifamily education and multifamily events. All right, so let's go ahead and dive into our topic today. This is a topic that I do like talking about, but I will say it's kind of a short topic because, as you can see there's only 3 things we're going to be covering today, so it will be a fairly short topic, but I will open it up at the end for some questions and answers, but I do think it'll probably only last about 15-20 minutes, and then we'll be finished. So for those of you who have joined us live, you can kind of mark that down as far as your time commitment for us today, but let's talk about how to accept international investors in your apartment syndication. So first question we have to ask is, why would you want to accept international investors into your deals? Well, on the live webinar, we already know we have lots of Canadians on the line with us, right? So there actually are a lot of Canadian investors that want to invest inside of an apartment syndication, but some syndicators say no, that you can't invest with them. And so one of the reasons why you would want to have international investors invest with you is that maybe you have a network of people that reaches out into other countries outside of the United States, and you want to bring in outside investment dollars, these international dollars, into your deal. And you can certainly do that. Now, there are certain things that you have to be aware of before you do it, and some of these different nuances are things that maybe some syndicators aren't familiar with, so they just say no to international investors. But if they're smart, they would actually do some research and figure out that it's actually not that hard to be able to set up a structure and a system to allow you to be able to accept non-accredited or accredited investors into your deals, depending on what type of offering you have, right? So you still have to maintain certain guidelines that are there from the IRS or from the SEC as far as you can't just bring in a non-accredited investor who's international and put them into one of your deals, right? If it's a 506 Charlie and you can only accept accredited investors. So you still want to maintain those differentiations, but there's definitely a few nuances that you want to be aware of as you're accepting new international investors into your projects. So first off, let's talk about some of these IRS regulations when it comes to making distributions to international investors. Now, when it comes to the IRS and you have these international investors, if you have an international investor that just invests with you, let's just say as an individual from another country, and they invest with you, then what you have to do is you have to make sure that international investor is paying their taxes like they're supposed to be paying. Now, you might be thinking, wait a minute, I don't want to do that. I don't want to mess with that stuff. And just be patient with me, because I'm going to give you a solution that will help you. And this is actually what number 3 is, the best option for allowing international investors to invest in your syndication. So, but that's the rule, okay? And that's one of the reasons why the best option is the best option, and I'll talk about that. But the IRS regulations basically is putting the onus on you or the entity that you create to be able to pay those taxes. And so what happens is if you accept an international investor, let's just say it's from Germany, and they're investing as an individual or a foreign entity or whatever into your syndication, and you make out monthly distributions to them or quarterly distributions to them, and then you also, when you sell the asset, you give them this large chunk of capital gain, and that investor ends up not paying their taxes, the IRS will actually come after the entity that issued those distributions and say, you now have to pay us those taxes because it was an international investor, and the onus is on you to make sure that they pay it. So one of the options that you can use, that you can do is if you want to accept it like that, then you just have to make sure that you withhold a certain amount. Most people will say between about 30 to 40% of whatever those distributions are, you got to hold back to make sure that they pay the taxes on that. And then, of course, 30 to 40% of the capital gain that you pay them out whenever you sell the asset. So there are certain regulations like that which make it a little bit more cumbersome and a little bit more complicated in order to accept international investors like that. So let's kind of shift a little bit here and talk about this third topic. Right? This third topic is all about trying to make sure that you have an option in place that maybe you can still accept international investors, but you don't have to worry about that IRS guideline. And the way you get around that is, no matter what country the investor is from, whether it be Canada or Germany or Australia or wherever it is, that international investor will come to. Well, actually, they don't have to say have to come to the United States, but they have to use a local CPA or an attorney to be able to set up their own U.S.-based entity that has its own U.S.-based entity that has its own EIN. So it has its own EIN that is issued by the IRS. Okay, and so you can see that right here. That's the best option for you to do. You basically are taking. You're basically making that investor go through one extra hoop so that you don't have to withhold their distributions, and then they now have a U.S.-based entity that's in the United States. So one of the, like for Canadians, one of the best things for them to do is for them to create a U.S.-based LP limited partnership here in the United States. Okay, and I know some people are asking about a PowerPoint or a screen or something like that. I don't have anything that I'm sharing with you, so it's really just this screen here. So maybe to help you, I'll do this so you can just see me. So I don't have any PowerPoint or screen sharing or anything like that. We have these 3 topics that are here that we're going to be talking about today about international investors, and that's it. So sorry about the confusion there. All right. And it wasn't just one person, it was 3 people, which is why I decided to stop and say that a little bit right there. But basically, the best option for international investors is to have them take their investment and to create an entity in the United States. So like I was talking about before, an LP, a limited partnership here in the United States, can be created, say for a Canadian, to invest in a U.S.-based entity, right? Now, one of the nuances as a syndicator that you have to be careful of is you have to make sure that when you're creating the entity structure for your investors, that, and this is something that we didn't do in the very beginning, we didn't really get a lot of international investors, is we would create every entity with an LLC structure. And the problem with an LLC structure, especially for Canadians, is that if a Canadian invests inside of an LLC structure, they actually will be double taxed because of the structure of an LLC here in the States. And I believe it's because in Canada they don't necessarily recognize it, or they think of it more of a corporation instead of a limited partnership. And so in order to avoid that double taxation for those investors, you have to create a limited partnership, which can work very similar to an LLC. There's a little bit of a difference in the nuances in the setting up of it. For example, in an LLC structure, you have a manager that actually manages the entity. Inside of an LP, you have a general partner that manages the entity. And so you have this kind of LP-GP relationship instead of a LLC manager relationship. So it's very similar, but it's a little bit different. And so one of the things that you do want to make sure that you do, though, is that the main entity would be, let's just say, apartment syndication asset one, LP would be the limited partnership. But then the general partner of that LP, it can be an LLC. So it's also recommended that it is an LLC for you as the general partner to protect your liability. And so that's what we do is we create now a structure where the main entity is a limited partnership, an LP structure. So apartment asset one LP, and then the general partner of that will be, syndication asset number one, general partner one LLC. Right, and so that LLC is the manager of the LP, and so the investors are going to come here to the United States and set up a U.S.-based LP structure, and that LP investment is going to be investing inside of the LP structure that you've set up for the syndication. So if you have a transactional attorney you're working with or a securities attorney that you're working with, it's very easy to set these things up one way versus the other. There's not a lot of differences between the two of them when it comes to your responsibilities with it. But on the back end, on the legal side, there's a little bit of a different structure. It doesn't necessarily cost more one way or the other, but if you want to accept international investors into your investment, you need to set it up as an LP structure relationship so that they don't get double taxed. Otherwise, they will likely not want to invest with you. So I'm going to open it up to some questions for you right now. I don't see any coming in right now. I told you it was going to be a little bit of a short topic. I think I went for maybe 10 minutes on these three different topics. I threw in an extra topic in there about the structure of the LP versus the LLC when it comes to international investors. But if you have some questions for me, I'll give you maybe a moment or two here to type some of those questions in. I know it was a short topic today, but if you have questions for me about this, I'll be glad to answer to them for you. And if not, great. Hopefully you're excited about international investors and bringing them in. And then, of course, your question might be, how do you attract these international investors, right? And that's where it comes to raising capital and having another whole other topic on where do you find some of these international investors? How do you raise some capital from international investors? And so we'll have some topics about that in some of our future webinars as well. All right, so I do have a couple of questions here. So let me open up some of these questions for investment. So, all right. So what about where the funds come from? So this is a question that Kevin's presented here. Does it matter if it comes from out of country? So as long as the money is coming to you through that U.S.-based entity, it does not matter, right? So what's going to likely happen is, let's say that somebody is coming in from Canada and they have Canadian dollars, right? So they're going to take that Canadian dollar, they're going to put it and convert it into the U.S. dollars and put it into a bank account that is created with their U.S.-based entity. So that's one thing I didn't really mention is the U.S.-based entity that needs to be created also must have a U.S. bank account with it. And so they're going to take that money that's international and they're going to convert it to the U.S. dollars and put it into that bank account, and all the money would be wired in from that U.S.-based account. So you don't have to worry about where the money comes from because it's all part of that U.S.-based entity. Are you creating a new LLC for each new LP that acquires an asset? Yes, we are from the syndication side. Now, as an international investor, you don't necessarily have to do that. As an international investor, you can create one LP in the States, and that one LP can have multiple investments in multiple different types of syndications. So it does not have to be just one LP for each passive syndication. It would actually get quite expensive if you did that because there is a cost associated with getting that stuff set up here in the States. For investors outside of Canada, would they set up an LP as well? So I don't know all the different nuances to international law and international investors from every country around the world. I do know for Canadians, that is the most ideal setup from what I've been told. I'm not an attorney, not a CPA, so I don't pretend to play one. This is just from what I've learned from our own investors that have invested with us internationally and how they've been able to structure it and set it up. So the best thing for you to do when you have these international investors is to connect them with local CPAs here in the United States that work with international investors, as well as these kind of tax attorneys, to help them structure it properly. And once they get it set up, it's usually pretty easy after that to get things set up and to go after that. Another question here is, do investors need to physically be in the U.S. to do this? No, they do not. So they can get this thing set up without physically being in the United States. So they don't actually have to physically be here. What about the EB-5 visa? Have you used that before? No, we have not used that, mostly because it's a large chunk of money that they have to put in, and there's also other employment or employee-related requirements that are usually associated with that, from what I'm familiar with, and so it's not usually a good ideal situation or setup for investments inside of syndications. All right, would you have the international investors do this for every deal individually, or would they be able to use the structure to invest in multiple deals? So yes, I think you probably typed this in as I was answering that last question, but yes, they can create one LP structure and invest in multiple deals. Also, if they want to take this distributions and actually use the money back in the home country, are they truly not then subject to local tax as well? No, they would still be, their US-based entity would still be subject to that local tax, right? But because it's a US-based entity, the IRS thinks of that as its own separate entity or citizen within the United States, if you will, and so that we don't have to act to make sure that they pay those taxes. But if that international investor does not pay their taxes in that U.S.-based entity, then they will be forfeiting their status with that U.S.-based entity, and they could be they will be legally liable for that as well. And the IRS will do everything in their power to come after you for that. Needs there to be proof? Does there need to be proof where the money comes from in terms of money laundering protection? The nice thing about this is no. So as long as they have set up that U.S.-based entity, and they have set up that U.S.-based entity to invest inside of through a U.S. bank account, then that U.S. bank is the one who's responsible for making sure that that money is going through those anti-money laundering protection laws. What is the money anti-laundering responsibilities of the GP? Zero if you are using a U.S.-based entity for that international investor. But if you're accepting outside money, then there are some additional things that you have to do to make sure that they aren't on any certain watch lists or anything like that, and making sure that they are not, laundering the money, if you will. That's why for us, we don't worry about that. We just require all of our international investors to create that U.S.-based entity and U.S.-based bank account, and it relieves us from that responsibility. What solicitation considerations should be kept in mind for international investors? Same issues depending on, it's the same issues for 506 Bravo versus 506 Charlie. There's not really any differences. I know some people will say that because they're international, you don't have to worry about that. And some people would say you have to worry about now the international securities laws, because now you're selling securities in that country basically, even though they're investing in the United States. But that's only if they're not using a U.S. bank account. So as long as they have a U.S.-based entity and they're using a U.S. bank account, then you are perfectly fine for that. All right, we have a group of investors in Canada. What's the ideal structure you recommend if we invest in your project? It's to create a U.S.-based LP structure and invest in that, and then invest those funds through that bank account that you've created with that LP structure into a deal. And we actually have some Canadian groups that actually do that with us right now, and it works out very well. And if you want, I can certainly introduce you to some of those people as well. All right, got a ton more questions coming in here. I have time for maybe one or two more questions, and then we'll finish it up. Which banks allow foreign investors to open a bank account without being here physically? And you're not, as an international investor, opening the bank account because you have a U.S.-based entity, right? So the U.S.-based entity is in the United States. So that U.S.-based entity is here in the United States, and then you can open up that U.S. bank account. Now, some banks are going to probably require you to come in and sign documents physically in the bank, and that would be something that you have to come to the United States for, right? So that's a requirement for the banks, and you would likely have to do that. But to get that entity created, you do not usually have to come into the country, from what I've been told. All right, let's see. If the investor is not in the country, how will they open up a bank account with their U.S.-based entity? That's usually done through some sort of person here in the United States, right? So there'll be somebody here that can act on behalf of the entity to get that bank account created. That's usually how you get around that. And a lot of times that could be your CPA or your attorney that you have set up to do that. All right, so lots of great questions. Thank you so much for being here. Looking forward to seeing everybody at the Mfin Summit coming up in January 2022. Make sure you mark your calendars and you go to that. You can go to mfinsummit.com for more information. Lots of great questions on this topic. I know international funds are very, very popular right now, and so we have definitely in our group seen an increase in that over the last 12 months, and I know that's something that you guys should tap into as well. So again, thank you so much for being here. Make sure that you join us next week for next week's topic. Let me see. It's actually called Finding Your First Apartment Syndication Deal. So the next topic you can go and register for now is going to be Finding Your First Apartment Syndication Deal. It's going to be coming up on Tuesday, November 9th next week at 11 a.m. And look forward to seeing you back here. So thank you so much, and hope you guys have a great rest of your week.